How's it going, guys? This is Trey Bell, and this is Arcane Frequencies. And tonight we're going to be reviewing the album Falling Through a Field by Black Moth Super Rainbow. Now, it's been a while since I've done a album review. I know I kind of left this channel dormant for a while, but back in form with a review which I would call one of my favorite albums of all time. Just to give a background of exactly Black Moth Super Rainbow, it's a psychedelic rock band created by frontman Tobacco, real name Thomas Feck. And Tobacco is also the solo artist name of the lead singer of this band, who makes music under that particular name, Tobacco. And so pretty much both Tobacco's music and Black Moth Super Rainbow's music are kind of one and the same. There's slight differences. There's more of a hip hop type of vibe when it comes to Tobacco's like solo work, whereas with Black Moth Super Rainbow it's more psychedelic rock, lo-fi, indie, alternative, whatever you want to call it, just kind of within, I mean, honestly, probably one of the more oddball-esque type of psychedelic rock music that you can honestly listen to within that sphere. But I had discovered Black Moth Super Rainbow when I was in college. And my friend, who actually also showed me Animal Collective at that time period during like around 2014 era of my life. I remember he used to play them a lot just outside, like out loud on his speakers, like whenever we were like in our art studios, just like drawing or something. And I had remember just like hearing the song Box Phones off of this album. And at this time I was literally always on the search of like the newest, weirdest like indie alternative music that I could get my hands on. And all I can say is like I had never heard music like this before at that time in my life, where it was just like this is different. I don't know how to even describe this, but all I know is that like it was melodic, very melancholic, very lo-fi, and just like felt like I was just like in a different dimension, like this hazy like field of some sort. Like I just remember like the song going like, "This devil said I'm the tree and you're alone," and this like weird raspy type of like voice, like you're like very up close to the microphone like this. And then and then what really made this song particularly interesting and honestly kind of haunting was like there was just like this weird vocal yelping or yodeling. I don't even know what you would call it. It just went something like, oh, oh, oh. And I was just like, yo, I need to figure out what this band is, because like this shit is lit. And honestly, like anyone who knows Black Moth Super Rainbow, this is definitely the type of music to get high to. Like when I had discovered Black Moth Super Rainbow along with Animal Collective and other bands like them, I was getting higher than a motherfucker listening to all their discographies on a daily basis. It was a good time period. Really, really good time period of my life. I was like 19, 20 years old. Oh my goodness, that was amazing. But yeah, but the funny thing is I actually discovered Tobacco before Black Moth Super Rainbow, not really even knowing they were the same people technically. And it was like my senior year of high school, and I was listening to Fucked Up Friends a lot. And I was just like, all right, I like this is interesting, because I never really listened to a lot of like instrumental music. Not to say like all of Tobacco's or Black Moth Super Rainbow's music is highly always instrumental, but like it's primarily that. Like you know, very minimal vocals, and even when there is vocals, you just hear the vocoder that Black Moth Super Rainbow is heavily known for. But the reason why I want to talk about Falling Through a Field is because like it's kind of one of the more like, I guess, lesser known albums, especially coming out of like the era that it was in, because it was like Falling Through a Field technically was Black Moth Super Rainbow's like first album. But a lot of people don't know is that beforehand, before Black Moth Super Rainbow even was branded, tobacco actually used to be called, or was originally incarnated as Satan stomping caterpillars. So a lot of what you're hearing on the first Black Moth Super Rainbow album is kind of the pre-era of Thomas Feck's musical journey. And I'll be honest, I actually kind of like this side of Black Moth Super Rainbow a little bit more. Like, honestly, when it comes to my likings of anything Thomas Feck has done when it comes to his output, in his incarnations, like I kind of like the Satan Stomping Caterpillars era all the way up to Dandelion Gum. And that's kind of like my little sweet spot for some reason. And then anything after that, I'm kind of okay with. Be honest, wasn't really that big of a fan of Cobra Juicy. I think it was just too poppy for my liking at the time. I probably should re-listen to it to have like a different opinion, because I really was very specific on like a particular sound of psychedelic music at this time period in my life. So I kind of have to like re-venture through all of Tobacco's and Black Moth Super Rainbow's work just to like have a better appreciation for it, because I was pretty nitpicky when it came to Black Moth Super Rainbow. But I really like, over time, like, this is the one album that has stuck with me all throughout. And but specifically around this era, when I had discovered Black Moth Super Rainbow, I also discovered that they were originally called Satan Stomping Caterpillars. And apparently a lot of people who love Black Moth Super Rainbow aren't even aware of Satan Stomping Caterpillars. And it's understandable, because it was a highly different sound. It was like very low key at the time, because it was, I think the first project had came out in like the 2000s, when the first Black Moth Super Rainbow project, Falling Through the Fields, actually came out 2003. So this is like, you're kind of dealing with like music coming kind of slightly out of the late 90s into the early 2000s. And at this time, like, especially for a band like this that's very niche, more nicher than niche, like, a lot of like its catalog is probably going to be like very low key and not overtly known, despite Black Moth Super Rainbow getting somewhat more popular over the years, obviously, for like how long they've been around. But they're still somewhat of like, they're kind of their own thing, in my opinion. And yeah, like, the thing about the Satan Stomping Caterpillars era, which I feel like is showcased a lot on Falling Through a Field, it really is more of just a hodgepodge of like older material. At least there's a good handful of material on Falling Through a Field that was already on the earlier Satan Stomping Caterpillars albums and projects at the time. And one thing that Tobacco is known for doing is like reusing songs or repurposing them or like revamping them, and honestly not really caring if like he reuses anything, because like if he feels like it can serve a different purpose, like, I'm not sure. The dude seems like he kind of just does whatever he feels like at that moment. Like, it doesn't seem like he really has a like intense narrative of what he's trying to do with this music. It's more about a feeling or a vibe. And definitely the Satan Stomping Caterpillars era was a very particular feeling that, like, honestly, I don't think I have ever heard in my life, nor do I think it's even possible to replicate this type of sound, because it's so DIY, it's so raw, unique, and just very pure, in a way where, like, yeah, you can say, like, there's elements of it, like, a lot of it sounds like demo tapes, but at the same time, that's kind of what makes it, like, intriguing to me. And that's what I loved about the Satan Stomping Caterpillars era. And apparently, even before Satan Stomping Caterpillars, I think Tobacco went under another alias before any of that, called the Allegheny Whitefish. And there's apparently like a compilation tape of all the stuff he was doing like during the 90s, that it was just himself just fucking around with shit. And a lot of the stuff really like sounds very raw, amateurish, and not good, but like in a good way if you can correlate it with like what he would create later on with Black Moth Super Rainbow and like the Tobacco solo work. and I don't know. They just kind of all live in this very interesting world that like I think only can come out of Tom's like head, and like I've just always found it intriguing. But when it came to listening to the one particular Satan Stomping Caterpillars album, The Most Wonderfulest Thing, I think honestly that is really my favorite project from anything BMSR related, and mainly because like I don't know, there's nothing I have ever heard since then that sounds like this album. It's very nostalgic. It makes me feel like I have nostalgia for something I had never heard of. I think there's a word for it. Hold on, let me look it up real quick. Oh yeah, anemoia or something like that. And honestly, I do kind of get that vibe when it comes to a lot of other lo-fi type of music. You know, even within the realms of like hip hop music, like lo-fi hip hop, like those like lo-fi fuzzy nostalgic beats that like are very repetitive, very like melancholic, like very melodic at the same time. And like anything that you probably would hear from like Earl Sweatshirt's like recent stuff. And apparently Earl Sweatshirt was also highly influenced by Black Moth Super Rainbow, which makes a lot of sense when like you compare some of their music styles. But yeah, it's just like there's just something about the Satan Stomping Caterpillars era that really does it for me. And I don't know, like the best way to describe it, like I'm not really gonna get into like the particular songs because like a lot of it is just like repetitive instrumental loops and just like just this adventurous vibe. But like the feeling of it just feels like I'm like walking through a hazy field that like is abandoned, but you feel like there's like little mystical fur like fuzzy creatures like lurking around. I mean, honestly, like the creatures you would even see like on both of these album covers, from either that tree person with a hatchet falling through a field, or like whatever the fuck that like a dead bird thingy that looks like it's decaying, about to fall into like a lake. Like I can't even describe exactly like what these images are. They're just like very ambiguous, and like that's just what I love about it. And like I feel like I would meet these creatures in these fields, or like maybe even like that little like sour patch tree kid looking thing that you see doing jump ropes on Starter People. Yeah, like those are the type of people, like things I feel like I would encounter in this world that like Satan Stomping Caterpillars, Black Moth Super Rainbow has created. And but specifically in the Satan Stomping Caterpillars like area, I really feel like I'm just like in a land of its own. Like the just very melancholic, like repetitive, fuzzy, like instrumentals, and like honestly just really what you would experience just like on like a very trippy psychedelic trip. Like a lot of this music really is made for like tripping. Like take a few caps of shrooms and acid and put some of this shit on, like you are set. Like you are set. Like but the main thing that I feel like I've always gotten from like this music, that like at least this particular era of BMSR, is like kind of just like the ending of adolescence. And from like some of the actual lyrics I did read up on when it came to some of the songs that have lyrics on them, a lot of it seems to be dealing with like the basic concepts of like life being born and then life decaying, forgetting old memories, and just like this kind of cutesy but slightly ominous like aesthetic that like I feel like tobacco is able to curate. It's like really cute and really creepy at the same time, but they're so meshed together. It's kind of hard to tell exactly like what I feel, because like I just feel like I'm just stuck in like a VHS tape that like hasn't seen the light of day since like the 90s, and you put it in a VHS player and like it's just this weird art project. Like that's honestly what this feels like. If anything, the things that I can relate the feeling of this music to is like stuff like kind of like almost similar to that one artist, I forgot what his name is, Jack Stauber. Like that's kind of what this music, if there's anything that sounds vaguely similar to it, is Jack Stauber's art and music. I don't know if I'm saying his last name right. And then another thing that this reminds me of is the music and just also the aesthetics of like that. I I think it's Dutch. I can't remember, but like that weird YouTube channel called Mushroom Land. It's technically about like this girl who takes mushrooms and ends up dying, but like it's like a whole entire series that lasted for a few years. But like yeah, I think it's like Mushroom Land. I can't, and like whoever was the person who made the music for that particular YouTube series, like that music sounds is like the only thing I can compare any of that to when it comes to like this era of Black Moth Super Rainbow, specifically just the Satan Stomping Caterpillars era. And a lot of, yeah, just a lot of like what's on here is just it's very melancholic, and but it's like it makes me happy but sad at the same time. And just I don't know, it just speaks to like this inner child of my soul that I feel like I've lost touch with like a long time ago. And upon even listening to this album, like the word I just said, anemia, like anemoia or something, like that's what I felt when I first heard this album. And now that like enough years have passed since then, now I'm just even this album is even more nostalgic because I just remember just being in college, just like hearing this type of stuff for the first time, and also along with other bands like this that I was like listening to like within the psychedelic realm, whether it was like Animal Collective, like I said, Youth Lagoon, and then of course all the indie essentials that I had been listening to, like Starfucker, MGMT, and just like any of those types of bands. Like, and the funny thing was, like when it came to Black Moth Super Rainbow when I was in high school, like my Spotify recommendation always recommended me Black Moth Super Rainbow and Animal Collective at the same time, and I'll always see these two particular bands, and I just never took the chance to listen to them. Like I never did, other than actually probably listening to like Tobacco's Fucked Up Friends that had came out close around that time, but had no correlation that they were the same thing. And so once I started like listening to like both of these like these groups, I was like, wow, I really took this long to listen to these bands. Like these bands are amazing. Oh my goodness, I'm stupid. I am stupid, Trey. You're stupid. You should have been listening to this. This like would have been amazing. But I'm glad I started listening to them at the time period that I did, because like that's of course like when I just started smoking the ganja, and goddamn, this shit is amazing when you're just lifted as fuck. But I guess to get into the music specifically, I'm not going to get too much into it. Like I'd rather you guys just like, for anyone who hasn't listened to anything Black Moth Super Rainbow related, like most of the music I would have to say kind of is like, you if you heard one Black Moth Super Rainbow album, not to say they all sound the same, but it's a very particular formula and vibe that Tobacco has, that it's just music just to like put on and just kind of just vibe to and enjoy. Like there's not really a lot to read into, but I would have to say when it comes to my favorite songs off of Falling Through a Field specifically, it would have to be, of course, the famous "I Think It's Beautiful That You Are 256 Colors Too." Dandelion Graves, Box Phones, which was technically my first Black Moth Super Rainbow song I had ever listened to. Smog and Cities, Falling Through a Field, Colorful Nickels, Boat Friends. And I would have to say what is my absolute favorite is the Magical Butterfly Net. And there are the other songs that are actually on the Satan Stomping Caterpillars album, The Most Wonderfulest Thing. I can't remember all of them. I'm not trying to get too like just look this up, because honestly, you can be in your own little rabbit hole when it comes to like Tobacco's work. Like it's something I feel like people should just like endure for themselves, and don't really need too much to like get into other than like just knowing that it's like nice psychedelic rock, lo-fi vibe, very repetitive, very like DIY, lo-fi, you know, the imperfections of this music is kind of what makes it special. And but yeah, the magical butterfly net is one of the songs that are actually reused for the Falling Through a Fields album that was originally on the Most Wonderfulest Things. And I think there's other songs even on previous that's on previous Satan Stomping Caterpillars albums that were also repurposed for Falling Through a Field. Like, if anything, Falling Through a Field is kind of obviously just kind of a very loosely put together album. There's not any narrative to it or like any proper cohesion that you probably won't get until later Black Moth Super Rainbow projects. But I think because it was my first album from them and my first representation, and along with having the understanding that there was Satan Stomping Caterpillars before this, it's like, okay, so there was an evolution up to getting to Falling Through a Fields, and then eventually what I guess most people would call the magnum opus of Black Moth Super Rainbow, Dandelion Gum, which admittedly I would say is probably like their best album when it comes to, you know, a very full-fledged like sound that like they fully like have, you know, curated themselves, and just it sounds like its own very specific thing. Like, it sounds like a full-fledged Black Moth Super Rainbow album. But it's just I don't know, it's just so fun because like the things about this album that I love is mainly the memories attached to this album. And like Falling Through a Field, I feel like it gave me it helped made me stick a lot of particular like things that were happening in my life at the time, like you know, friends I was like connecting with, old hometown friends I was connecting with, certain movies I was watching or like trying to like watch or get into, like specifically like the movie Moonrise Kingdom was something that I had started watching at this time period in my life a lot, and I kind of associate this album with that particular movie because like there's just certain similar like indie type of vibes. I was like really heavily into a lot of indie stuff at the time, so yeah, I just like this album just helps me associate with a lot of like particular feelings and emotions. So like I would say, even though Falling Through a Fields in itself really isn't like that grandiose of an album or particularly like, you know, well crafted album, it's more of like the feelings and nostalgia that I have for this album that makes it my favorite Black Moth Super Rainbow project. And again, I kind of like link it in a bit with the Satan Stomping Caterpillars era, because I would say Falling Through a Field is pretty much Tobacco's transitioning into creating what will eventually be known as BMSR. Pretty much that is just like, you know, I feel like from Start of People is where officially BMSR starts like evolving like their signature sounds with the vocoders. Like, it's more poppier, like just very bubbly psychedelic, like just instrumentations and stuff. And I appreciate all different aspects of it. But again, like I said, pretty much everything from the Satan Stomping Caterpillars era up to Dandelion Gum is like my favorite era of Black Moth Super Rainbow. And honestly, I probably need to revisit their whole entire discography just to get a better grasp on everything, and honestly probably listen to it with a more sober mind this time instead of being high on my mind like I used to be listening to all this stuff. But yeah, like Falling Through a Field, Satan Stomping Caterpillars, I would highly check this era of Black Moth Super Rainbow out, because I do feel like a lot of fans aren't even aware of the Satan Stomping Caterpillars era, because that's what I feel like Falling Through a Field is kind of that transitioning out of that. Because another thing about this era of Black Moth Super Rainbow is like there wasn't a lot of like bubbly like synthesizers like used throughout this album. There was not even that much vocoder. I think it was only maybe on like 2 songs here and there. A lot of it really is just kind of like, you know, you still have like instrumental loops, some type of like automatic like music maker, but a lot of acoustic guitars, and even more on the Satan Stomping Caterpillars albums. And I keep saying Stomping Caterpillars. Let me just show you. I'll just say what the Satan Stomping Caterpillars discography is real quick, just so you guys have an understanding of like where they started out at. Yeah, so the first Satan Stomping Caterpillars album came out in the year 2000. It's called Flower Slides. And this one is definitely, and I think this was like the transitioning out of the Allegheny Whitefish era of Tobacco's life and wanting to actually make more cohesive like forms of music. And and then and then the next album after that. Oh yeah, and the thing about Flower Slides is it's a pretty interesting album. It's funny because I think there's a lot of like songs from it that are like missing for some reason. I'm not sure. It's very confusing. Like, of course, like this is almost. I mean, the internet existed, but like this is definitely like the old decades of the internet, and like things were like something that was like this niche and like low key that Tobacco was making would probably got lost in the wind, or were just kind of more just personal projects. So like there's a few songs you can listen to on there. It's all, and you can find all this stuff on Bandcamp. I think Tobacco actually has like a domain where he has all of his like older material just like in one consolidated place, or like at least the links of it still ties back to like Black Moth Super Rainbow or Tobacco or Rad Cult, anything like within that vein. And then the next album you got, I think they actually came out with an EP after this. It's called EP Sing to Us, which kind of just, I guess, includes some songs that will eventually go on to the next album that would be called The Autumn Kaleidoscope Got Changed. Now, this is honestly, I would say, also a really good Satan Stomping Caterpillars album. Like, I already mentioned The Most Wonderfulest Thing, which is like pretty much the last Satan Stomping Caterpillars album until they transitioned to Black Moth Super Rainbow. But I will also highly recommend like The Autumn Kaleidoscope Got Changed, because there are some songs on here that I think are on some other Black Moth Super Rainbow albums that are like revamped, and it's just interesting. It's just interesting how he's reused some of these ideas and just kind of just is trying to amp up like these particular vibes or just revisit stuff. Like it's honestly, I feel like listening to the music feels like it's more of an exploration of like just himself, like Thomas Feck. And just, I mean, just even based off listening to an interview with him, he definitely seems like a very like reclusive to himself type of individual, and just kind of makes things based off of pure feeling whenever he feels like it. So like, it's just like whenever you get a Black Moth Super Rainbow album or Tobacco stuff, like, be like, it's just going to be very casual. I actually got a chance to see Black Moth Super Rainbow live like way back in 2018. It was pretty dope. I really liked it a lot. But yeah, check those albums out from Satan Stomping Caterpillars. Check out Falling Through a Field. And I'm going to end this album review on, actually, ironically, an album review of this album, because it was the only review at the time that I could find of this particular album. But yeah, it's on SputnikMusic.com. This review was made way back in 2008. So here we go. Review summary. Blurring the lines between sleep and death. This album makes me want to fall asleep and never wake up again. Black Moth Super Rainbow's Falling Through a Field is an unpretentious, organic, electronic album of whispered lullabies and unabashed lust for nature. All of the songs on the album are relatively short, save for the closing track, but this doesn't really dampen their effectiveness in any way. Falling Through a Field is pretty lo-fi compared to the group's later efforts, and this little detail, combined with the hushed in your ear vocals, drowsy bells, and trippy beats, makes for an atmosphere of cozy, lethargic bliss. Black Moth Super Rainbow love the sun and simplicity. While I don't think there is inherently anything wrong with complexity, falling through a field shows beautifully the less can relay so much more if executed properly. I get a singular vision when I listen to this album. I see, I hear, I really feel a lusciously warm field on a sunny late summer afternoon. Grass being tickled by sweet, innocent breeze bending itself into a bed for the vocalist to dissolve into in his tired euphoria. One of the standouts on this album is the half asleep lullaby. I think it's beautiful that you are 256 colors too, especially when Tobacco whispers, I'll just stand on the meadow, I'll be taken by sunbeams. He isn't longing, he isn't hoping. I hear simple realization and embrace of what is, and what is happen to be dripping golden sensory overload in an unnamed field. Another pleasure in the trippy funeral dirge lullaby of dandelion graves, glowing with a pleasant organ and vocals more whispery than ever. This song liberates death from its usual dusty home of cryptic gloom by laying it down softly and sweetly in a baby's crib. In a way, I feel this song is saying, at least to me, that when people die, we miss them. We'd like to think they'd miss us if they could. But the whole process is accepted, appreciated, and regulated, its own little token of beauty, all without resistance. I'm not going to review every track, but I want to mention my final favorite from the album, and that's Falling Through a Field. Whispering about his coffin made of dandelions and how he will essentially rot into the earth. Fall through a field sounds more romantic. Forever and ever, the vocalist seems to be quite okay with all of this. Why shouldn't he be? Really, perspective is almost everything, as this album proves, and Black Moth Super Rainbow manages to carve out a soothing, utterly refreshing, deceptively childlike story perfect just before bedtime, regardless of whether that bedtime is permanent or not. If you aren't familiar with this offering from Black Moth Super Rainbow, find it. Get nice and sleepy, lie down, put it on, and allow yourself to be lulled into sluggish dream fields while honest, innocent whispers crawl up inside your ears and put you to sleep. And honestly, I really couldn't end that review off any better. That's kind of the best thesis to give this album. I really love this album. It is something that I listen to every year, at least once or twice or three times a year throughout my life since I discovered it when I was like 19. And I'm 27 now, and I still love this album to death. And again, like I still kind of lump this in with the satanstompingcaterpillars album. So most of the time when I listen to this album, I kind of revisit those older albums. And honestly, I probably need to do a little bit better in actually diving into the rest of their catalog. I've already listened to every single Black Moth Super Rainbow album, but I've never took the time to fully appreciate them. What I really still need to do is listen to more like Tobacco's projects. But again, he keeps coming out with stuff like just very casually, and they're just fun, nice little like beats to listen to. It's pretty much just a hip hop version of Black Moth Super Rainbow, and I like it. And also, I fucking love the collab album that he did with A$AP Rock. Like, actually, when I first heard A$AP Rock and him on the Fucked Up Friends album and realized they made Malibu Kin, I was like, yes. This is what we needed. And honestly, it's like at least within the realms of A$AP Rock, it's definitely one of my favorite albums from him. Tobacco, he did his thing. Just simple like beats here and there, but honestly, like I do feel like it's good just to see that like they made something out of like one song that they did a long time ago and actually did a full collaboration album. So like Black Moth Super Rainbow, Thomas Feck, Tobacco, Satan Stomping Caterpillars, and I guess the Allegheny Whitefish. You're awesome. I really like you. And with that said, have a good night, guys. Listen to Falling Through a Fields. I highly recommend it. And with that, I am out. Peace.